Hey everyone. So we are going to get right into the hands-on portion of this and pick up from where we left off last time. You should have downloaded that zip file full of different pieces of data that we're going to be stitching together. And it additionally has this completed dashboard called IACA 2024 in it, or that you should be able to sort of, look to as like a finished product that we're slowly building out piece by piece. Our dashboard that we were building last time we were together looked something like this at the end of the session. So we had two slicers, one on a date and one on a text field, the officer name. We had an image that we had incorporated. We had some text just serving as a title, and then we had three different cards. And the cards were counting the same thing. We're looking at offense data, but the second card has a filter on it for part one offenses only. And so that was when we came over here and selected just the certain rows that it should be able to count. And then this third one has a subtitle. It counts part one offenses in the previous 28 days. So if you look over here on the filter tab, you should see not only the NIVERS code filter, but also the data card filter. There is one thing that I'll point out on the date slicer over here. Some of you might have opened this up and it might be showing 12/13 as your most recent date here. Remember that we put a relative date filter on this, meaning that we knew that this offense data has data that occurs in the future. So this data, I think, goes through 2026. But we didn't want the top end of this range to show 2026. We always wanted that to be through today. So we put a relative date filter on this, and we said, hey, just show us items that occurred in the last 9,999 days. If you are still showing 12/13 here, one thing that you can do is take this slider sort of towards the middle, let go, and then bring it back. If that does not get it to 12/20, showing today's date, you can hit the refresh button and then do that, and it should update and show you today's date in this little window here at the north end of the slider. Okay, so we are going to continue building out different visualizations. We started off with cards. Cards are the most simple visualization. Slicers, just a little bit more sophisticated than cards. But you'll notice that the pattern or the way that we create visualizations are going to be incredibly repetitive. We sort of move back and forth between these three windows, the data window, the visualization window, and the filter window in the same way. Additionally, we're going to be using our format painter throughout so that we can apply all of the visualization settings from one visualization to another without having to go in and make all of those same choices again whenever we want to add a different type of visualization. So we're going to start off with a table, and tables are exactly what they sound like. They're like bringing in a spreadsheet or something to your dashboard. It just lists information out. These are really great for if you want to create a dashboard that allows you to filter down to a certain date range and then read all of the specific details about an offense, maybe even read narrative information about an offense right on your dashboard. So you can do that by coming over to your Build Your Visualizations pane, and then it's this white table icon, sort of third from the bottom, right, almost right in the center. I'm going to click on that, and just like with all of our other visualizations, when I do that, it's going to add this nondescript gray box. So just like the cards, there's now one section over here on the right-hand side where we can add data fields. One of the big differences between cards and tables are that with tables, you can add multiple data fields. So we're going to start building this table out in one column at a time, moving from left to right. So if I want to display an offense, one of the first things that I'm going to want to put in is a report number or an offense number. So to do that, I'm going to click and drag this report number down into the column section. And as you can see, now it's going to list out all of our report numbers here. If your table looks a little different, if you're seeing something that maybe looks like this, it's only got one row, that's probably because there's some sort of aggregation whenever you add that column. So just to be sure, I'm going to click on this, the column that I added, and I'm going to make sure that Don't Summarize is selected. And you should just be now seeing a list of all of the different report numbers that are in our data set. We can then go ahead and filter this down. So like if we only wanted to see stuff that's occurred in the last couple of days, I could come up here and add in a date filter. Here's stuff in the last week. There we go. And we've got 49 offenses. Now, if you've used report numbers, keep in mind the difference between the level of analysis of reports and offenses. Every report can have multiple offenses. So because we're counting offenses over here, there may not be 49 reports. There might be fewer than that because every report can have multiple offenses. Just keep that in mind. For our next column, I might want to add in the officer that responded. So I can click and drag the officer in. It should give me an officer field there. Oh, I just added that to the wrong visualization. Didn't I tell you I was going to do that like a million times? I'm going to hit undo real quick. I changed our date slicer to an officer slicer. So I'm going to make sure that I've got my table selected and it's got the light gray frames around the outside here. And then I'm going to click and drag my officer field and add it right below report number. And now it lists out for each one of these report numbers, the officer that took the report. Maybe I want to add in the date that this occurred. And you know what? I actually want that to be the beginning of the table. So I'm going to add this to the top of this stack here of columns. Now you'll notice something interesting, and this is going to be really important when we get to line graphs too. So I'll introduce the concept now. Anytime you add a date to a visualization, you are going to see Power BI automatically create a hierarchy. And a hierarchy are just ways of aggregating different date values. So you can see that this hierarchy, like whenever I added this date field to the columns, it already broke out years, quarters, months, and days. Those aren't going to have a whole lot of application on a table, but when we move to some other visualizations, that's actually going to be really impactful. One of the things that I almost always encourage people to do when I'm talking to people who are analyzing crime data is to remove the quarter section of the hierarchy. And that's just because we rarely ever look at crime in terms of quarters. That's really more of a sales thing. We might look at crime from week to week, day to day, month to month, year versus year, but we rarely ever say quarter two, crime was up over quarter one, 8% or whatever. So it took that one column and it essentially made 4 columns in our table, one column representing each level of the hierarchy, a year, a quarter, a month, and a day. And if I want to remove quarter, I'm just going to click on the X next to quarter, and now that's gone. So now we can see our date, and it spells it out for us. And then maybe I want people to be able to read narrative information straight from the dashboard. I can go and I can grab this narrative field and pull it down here to the end. And it's going to resize my table to incorporate a big long text field. Now, if you're looking at this and you're trying to read those narratives, you're not having any sort of like brain synapse issue here. All of these are in Latin. That's just because I use a service called Norm to simulate all of this data. If you want to, this table, I could fit it down somewhere like here in the bottom, and I can run it across the entire dashboard. But if you're working with something as big as a narrative field, chances are it's one column that's kind of causing your sizing issues. You can resize any one of these columns individually. And the way to do that is to grab the rightmost side of the column at the very top and just click and drag. Now, obviously, when you do that, it is going to make every row wider to accommodate all of that space, but you can space these narrative columns and all of the other columns out however it is you see fit. So I'm going to drag mine in a little bit, and I'm going to make this whole table a little bit shorter. And once you've got your columns set the way that you want them to, we need to format this so that our visual settings that are on everywhere else get applied to this table. So to do that, I'm just going to click on any one of these visuals. It doesn't matter which one. So I'll click on this slicer over here. Then I'm going to make sure that I've got the Home tab opened up. I'm going to go select my Format Painter, and then I'm going to find somewhere on the table to click on. Now, there does need to be some white space. And what I mean by white space is when you're using the Format Painter, not space that you can actually like interact with. So you might want to, if you're having trouble formatting, painting any one of these visuals, grab your Format Painter, make the table a little bit wider so there's this white unused space over here. Then grab your Format Painter and hit that area. That'll be that will apply the settings for you. That might be a little bit easier. Of course, we need to give some sort of title to this guy. So to do that, we're going to do the same thing that we did for every other visualization. Make sure that you've got your table selected. I'm going to go over to the visualizations pane. I'm going to go down to format your visual. Then I'm going to go to general and title. And right here in the text box, I'm going to type in a title that makes sense. All this details. Yep. And when I'm happy with it, I can space it out and put it somewhere in my dashboard that I want to keep it. So I like to start with tables because they're pretty straightforward. There's actually a better way to use something like this that gives you case information that doesn't take up a whole bunch of space on your dashboard, but we're not quite ready to get to that just yet. So I'm going to move this table out of the way. I want to keep it. I'm just going to come down here to page 1 and hit that plus sign and open up a second page. I'm going to move that table over to page 2. So I'm going to right click on the visual and I'm going to go to copy, copy visual, and go over to page 2. And I'm going to hit my paste button, which is up here in the top left. There we go. So now you should just have a second page that's just got your table sitting there floating out on its own. Then if I come back to page 1, I can delete that table that's there. We still got our work. We're going to use this, but I'm going to come back to it a little bit later. Another very similar visualization type with some key differences are matrices. So a matrix is like a table, except in addition to listing columns, you can also list rows, and the cells in between them are a form of aggregation. So with tables, we don't actually aggregate anything in here. We just list data. We just display it and officer names. With a matrix, we can actually do operations inside each of the cells. And I'll show you what I mean with a really simple example. So to add a matrix, we're going to come over to our visualization pane. We're going to find the table icon that's got like a little blue reverse L on it. If you hover over it, it says matrix. I'm going to make sure that I don't have any other visual selected, and then I'm going to click on it to add the matrix. And of course, we get our nondescript gray box. Now, you'll notice that over here on the visualizations pane, this is a little bit different. With the table, we just had a column section. With the matrix, we have both columns and rows, and then we also have values. So one of the best ways to use this is to break crime down geographically. So we've got a column called zone here. We've also got some offense counts, things of that nature. So I'm going to make a copy of this guy, our breakdown by zone. So to do that, we're going to come over here to our matrix. I'm going to grab my zone field, and I'm going to put that in the column section. And you can see what just happened here. In the top part of the matrix, we're now seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This hypothetical jurisdiction divides their patrol zones into 8 different areas. So every offense has to occur in zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8. And then we can get a breakdown by offense type by taking our NIBRS code and putting it into the rows. Now you'll notice right off the bat that our example over here only has, like 8 or 9 rows. They're kind of grouped together versus what we just did. We just created like 40 or 50 rows of NIBRS codes. That's because we've, in the finished product, grouped some of these codes together in ways that make sense. We'll come back to that concept in just a minute. But for right now, we just want to create a matrix that breaks down how many 09 Bs occurred in zones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. How many 11As, how many 120s, how many 13As, so on and so forth. So to get that information, I'm going to come over here to my offense number field. I'm going to drag that into the values. Now it's going to give us some really extreme values at first because, again, like what we saw last time we got together, anytime it's looking at an integer, it's going to default to some, and we don't necessarily want that. So to get accurate counts, we are going to click on our value field here. And we're going to go to the count aggregation. And this is looking much better. So what this is telling me is that in this date range that has been selected, if we look inside zone 1, we've had 9 11A offenses. There have been a total of 124 11A offenses that occurred in this entire data set, and 28 of them occurred in zone 4. And if we come down here, you can see that there have been 18 510 offenses in zone 2. So just like before, we want to apply our visualization, our formatting. So to do that, I'm going to click on any visual that's already formatted. Hit this card. I'm going to go to my format painter. I'm going to find a white space somewhere on the matrix. And I'm going to click. Of course, it's going to apply all of our settings, but it's not going to give us a title. So I'm going to go back over to my visualizations. I'm going to go to format your visual. I'm going to go to general and title. And give this a name that makes sense. Call this a zone breakdown. There are also some other formatting options that you can apply when you've got big tables with aggregation in the middle going on here. Those of you who are familiar with Excel might be familiar with conditional formatting. It is largely a very similar process in Power BI to apply conditional formatting. So what conditional formatting is, it's great that I've got this big table breaking down, but to actually look at this and draw out any insights, it's not very useful because I have to go through here and I have to say, all right, well, it's 27, 23 C offenses in zone 4. Is that a lot? Well, I don't really know. I'd have to look at all of these other zones. I'd have to look at other offenses that occurred in zone 4. It would be really great if the biggest numbers here had like bright red coloring and the smallest numbers had like light green coloring, kind of like a heat density map. Well, you can apply that by coming over here to the values section of your build your visualization, right click, and then we're going to go up to conditional formatting. And so if you choose background color or font color, I think the interface is largely the same. I'm going to pick font color for now, just for fun. Whenever you do this, it's going to change the color of the font of the numbers based on size relative to the other numbers in the table. And so this menu is actually identical to the one that is there inside Microsoft Excel. You can do a gradient, which means that as numbers are on the lower end of the scale, they have one color versus the higher end of the scale, they have a different color. So maybe we want the lowest numbers to have a green and the highest numbers to have a red. There we go. You can also do rules. Rules are a little difficult, but you can go in there and you can add in a whole bunch of different rules. So you can make very specific values. They have to be over 100 in order for them to turn red or something like that. I typically like to stick with gradients, and I also like to add a middle color. So you can add in a third color for your center values here by clicking on this checkbox here on the left. And I'm just going to apply my green to red fade, and then I'm going to click OK. When you do that, you can automatically see where the concentrations are in this matrix. We can see much more easily, oh, okay, wow, 90B offenses inside zone 5 are a much bigger problem than 40A offenses inside zone 1. And then, of course, just like with all of our other visualizations, this is now dynamic. So if you wanted everything else on the link chart or on the dashboard to update and reflect only 35A offenses, the end user can come in here and select 35A. As you can see, like right now, we've only got the cards that are displaying things, so those are the only things that really change. But as we add maps and bar graphs and trends over time and stuff like that, all of that will also update. If you want to see everything that's gone down in zone 5, this is totally interactive. So I'm going to leave this as it is for the moment. I am going to come back to the concept of grouping offenses together. Right now, we don't have anything in our data that exists that is like broader categories than just these offense codes. But we can add that in, and we do that using a programming language called DAX, which is very similar to Excel formulas. It just tends to be a little bit more advanced, so that's probably something that we'll get into in our third session. All right, so we've got some tables now. We've got a matrix, other visualizations that we can add, going from simple to more sophisticated. Pie charts. I know people have a whole lot of feelings about pie charts. My general rule of thumb is if you have a field that has that has 2 or 3 possible values, I might consider a pie chart. So we've got this field in our data that shows victim injury. That is a dichotomous variable, either yes or no. So perfectly suitable for a pie chart. So if I wanted to add one, I could come over here to my pie chart symbol. It's going to add in a gray box. And as you can see, the pie chart fields are a little bit different. It doesn't have a row and a column and a values field. It has a legend and it has values and it has details and it has tooltips. Now, some of this stuff we're not necessarily going to use right away, but I'm going to go ahead and take my victim injury field and drag it into legend. And then I'm also going to take it and drag it into values. And as you can see, it automatically shows us what percentages and how many. It's got some counts displaying here of offenses have a value of yes for victim injury and a value of no. Make this a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Of course, I want to apply all my visual formatting. I'm going to do that with the use of a format painter. So I'm going to go grab my matrix. I'm going to click on it, make sure that light gray bar is there. I'm going to hit format painter, and then I'm going to find some white space on the pie chart. This is great, but the default title is kind of annoying. I want that to be something else. So I'm going to come over here to format your visual. I'm going to go to general and title. And I'm just going to change this to victim injury question mark. With pie charts, there are some additional visualization options to consider. So if we go back to our format your visual pane, the legend, you may want to just turn on or off. So you can toggle that legend off altogether. If you notice that my legend's title is the same as the title of the visualization, that's a little redundant. So I probably don't need a title there on top of the legend. So I can toggle the title off and make this a little bit more concise. If you want to change the colors of the slices themselves, you can. So maybe we want to make the yes red and the no a darker blue. And that actually works out pretty nicely. I like that. You can toggle the detail labels on and off. That will take these numbers and percentages away. You can also change where those are. So right now they're positioned on the outside of the pie chart. If you want them to be inside, you can have them move inside the pie. You can tell them to prefer outside. And what that will do is keep it outside unless it becomes visually just unable to. You can also tell it prefer inside unless you make it so small that one of them has to move outside because there's just not enough space. I'm going to keep mine outside, I think. You, of course, have your values field here. And so the values are pretty much going to be the same options on every visualization. We can change the font. We can make it bold. We can change the color. So this is sort of a gray. If I want to make it like a true black so that it stands out a little bit more, I can. Take that bold off. There we go. Display units. You can change on the auto, it might be giving you like a fractional. So by default, it's showing 5.52K down here. Well, that's not so bad on its own, but then this other one is like 0.68K. I don't know, that's probably a little confusing. Well, that's because it's trying to aggregate the display units. So if you just simply turn that to none, it will just show the numbers exactly as they exist. You can also mess with decimals, although there are no decimals here, so it doesn't really matter. And then you can also rotate the pie chart a little bit. So like if you want your colored wedge to be like centered, I know that somewhere on this class right now is like an OCD analyst like myself who just absolutely has to either have that wedge like perfectly north or perfectly south or whatever, can't have it cocked off to the side like that. That's wrong. You can come in here and you can mess with your rotation and get it set just the way that you want it to. So once you get your pie chart all set, I'm going to resize this. In reality, I'm probably just going to turn my legend off. And then I'm probably also just going to turn my detail labels off. It may not make sense for everybody, but we tend to know that more often than not, the victim is an injured, and this gives us a good sense of how frequently it is, even though there aren't exact percentages there. There's a whole lot of theory we could go into about how to display data, but I'm just going to move this guy out of the way. I'm up there. All right. Very similar to pie charts and with almost the exact same settings are ring charts. And in fact, they're so similar, I don't think that I'm actually going to go and make a ring chart. I'm just going to select my pie chart and change it to one. So with my pie chart selected, if you come over here to your Build Visual tab and click on Ring Chart, it will change this from a pie to a ring. And a ring chart just shows a sort of a hollowed out pie chart, and it's the percentage of the outside of the ring as opposed to the percentage of the pie that represents the different categories. Bar charts, some of the most useful visualizations that you're going to use. You can create a variety of different bar charts in Power BI. I tend to stick with a stacked bar chart more often than not. So you can start a stacked bar chart by clicking on the visualization that is in the top left. And you can change this from a horizontal to a vertical as you see fit. And in fact, I think that we're probably going to wind up building it one way and then change it so that you can kind of see a difference. The vertical is the second option up here. So again, you're seeing some different fields down here. It's asking you, you have to put something in for the x-axis and something in for the y-axis. Legend, small multiples, tooltips, all of those are optional. So if you look at our example dashboard, we've got a count of top 10 offenses here. And so this is a horizontal bar chart that lists offense codes out here in your bars. So to do something like that, I'm going to come over here to my x-axis. I'm going to pull in the offense code. I guess if we're vertical, it's got to be the y-axis. Sorry about that. So I've still got this bar chart, the one in the upper left column selected. I'm going to move into the y-axis, my neighbors code. And then in the x-axis, we're going to pull in our offense number. And remember, that's going to default to a sum. I'm going to change that to a count. So we're counting offenses in the categories of the codes in which they occur. So at this point, if you want to, you can change this back and forth from a stack to a horizontal, from a vertical to a horizontal alignment. I kind of like, with the data the way we've got it laid out here, this vertical alignment, but there are going to be cases where we might want to change it to a horizontal alignment. But the first thing that we're going to do is apply our visual settings. So I'm going to go grab my matrix. I'm going to hit my format painter. I'm going to find some white space on this chart, and I'm going to apply all of the settings. Of course, the title doesn't make any sense by default. So I'm going to come over to format your visual and go to the title setting. I'm going to change the text here. Contents breakdown. There are a few additional visualization options. So if you come over to visual, and this is under format your visual, you've got some Y and X axis options. So you can toggle these on and off. It doesn't particularly make sense to do that with the Y axis because that's telling us what each of these groups are. But you might want to turn off your X axis. So if you open up your X axis and turn the values to off, it's just not going to show these numbers down here, this 0 and this 100. I'm going to turn mine off. I'm going to go back to the Y axis for a second. Of course, the values in the Y axis are all of our offense codes. So just like with everything else, we can change the color, we can change the font. You can also change your layout. So the height is the space in between the bars. If you increase that height, it's going to make each one of those bars a little bit thicker and give them a little bit more space. If you go to the X-axis, you can set your range. Of course, here's where you can make sure that your bar graph always begins with a 0 value, so as to not be misleading. All of these things, I don't know that I've ever seen the auto function not set a bar graph to 0. So usually those are pretty safe, but you're welcome to come in here if you just want to make sure. You can turn your values from the X-axis on and off. We already talked about that. Your title. It's not particularly useful to have count of offense number down here. So if I want to just toggle that off, I can. You can add grid lines if you'd like. You can turn on a zoom slider. It's not particularly needed with this bar graph, but if you have bar graphs that have like a really big spread between the categories, you might want a zoom slider on. In the bars section, you can change the coloring of the actual bars in the bar graph. So sticking with our theme from earlier, I'm going to change the color from this sort of default light blue to this darker blue. You can make them transparent. You can also put a border around your bars. This makes a lot more sense if you're trying to use a very light color. So for instance, if I came over here to back to my bar color, and let's just say I made it like this really light blue. Maybe that's your agency's color or something like that. You can turn a border on around those bars and it will put like a dark black line around the outside, and it helps with contrast a little bit. And then of course you can change the color of that line to make it really dark. You can make it a little transparent. You can play with the visualization of the border as well. But my chosen bar color is pretty dark, so I probably don't need a border on mine, so I'm going to toggle that off. We're not going to do a whole lot with ribbons. Ribbons are these spaces in between the bars. If you want to give it a look as if it was a histogram instead of a bar chart, I guess you can do that. I don't usually play with that option. You can also turn on data labels. So instead of having your label down here that just shows kind of the range, you can have each individual bar labeled with exactly how many what values it represents. And then of course you can play around with the background here as well. So if you want the back of this bar chart to be your image from earlier, you can come in here and you can put a image in the background of your bar chart. I don't typically do that. I think it's a little confusing, but that is something that you can do if you want. So at this point, I think that we've got our bar chart pretty well formatted. So I'm going to move him down. Again, the bar chart kind of suffers from the same problem that the matrix does, and that is that we have a lot of bars here. So one way that we can solve that is to create groupings. We're not going to do that just yet. But another way we can solve that is to create a filter that only shows a top 10. And so we haven't done this just yet. We've done a relative date filter. We've done a basic filter. And I think we've done an advanced filter. But we can also use what's called a top N filter. And to do that, we're going to open up your filters pane. So if you haven't had this open, make sure you've got it open. Then we're going to come over here to our filtering options, and we're going to drag in offense number. So we're going to drag in Neighbors code. And when you drag in Neighbors code, it's going to default to basic filtering. And so this is what we did on our last session when we went through and we selected out just the part 1 offenses for this card over here that counts part 1 offense in the past 28 days. But we're going to change this from basic filtering to top N. And so here it's asking us how to define that. So I'm going to tell it that I want to see the top 10 Neighbors codes, and then you have to tell it how to define the top 10. And so to do that, we're using a count of how many offense numbers are attached to those codes. So I'm going to drag in my offense number to the by value. And I'm going to change it to a count. I know that that was a lot, so do that one more time. I've got my Neighbors code. I've dragged in once. I've turned it to a top N. I'm telling it a top 10. And then I'm going to go grab my offense code, offense number. I'm going to change that to a count. When I've got that ready, I'm going to hit apply filter. And now it's only going to show me my top 10 Neighbors codes. Something to keep in mind, if you do a top N, if there is a tie, it will not resolve the tie. It will just add more bars than what you asked it to. So like right now, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I've got 10 bars. But if there was another offense code that had 124 value, 24 offenses, it would be showing me 11 bars. And that is because there was a 3-way tie for 9th place. But we didn't run into that problem here. But as you adjust your slicers, you might say, like, here we go. Yeah. If you do your date range from 10/20 of 2023 through 12/20 of 2024, there's actually 11 bars here, and that's because there's a 4-way tie at the bottom. And so it didn't want to just arbitrarily leave one out, so it includes them all. Of course, our offense breakdown title is now not accurate because this is a top 10. So I want to change that. So I'm going to click on my visual. I'm going to go to Format, in General. I'm going to go to Title. Then I'm going to add top 10 to the title. Then I'm going to move this guy out of the way. Hands down, one of the most sophisticated, interesting, and useful visualizations that you can do inside Power BI are line graphs. And there are a lot of advanced features available in line graphs that we haven't seen with these other graph types just yet. I'm going to pull this pie chart out of the way so we get a little bit more space. So to get started with a line graph, we're going to make sure that we've clicked off of all of our other visuals. We're going to come over here to build your visual, and line graph is the second from the top left corner. You hover over it, it says line chart. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to stretch this baby out so we've got some room. And as you can see, we've got a whole bunch of different options here that we haven't seen with some of the other visuals just yet. So line graphs are really great for showing change over time. As a result of that, our x-axis is always going to be some unit of time, and we only have one date field in our data. So I know that I need to drag in date to the x-axis. Now you'll notice that when I did that, again, we're going to see that hierarchy that we saw earlier. It automatically breaks dates out into years, quarters, months, and days. Hold on to that for just a second because it's about to be really impactful. The y-axis is what we want to show changes in over time. And this whole dashboard has been all about crime counts. So we're going to grab our offense number and pull it into the y-axis. And then we're going to change this from a sum to a count. There we go. So at this point, it's not looking too impressive. First thing that we'll do is, of course, we'll apply our visual settings to it. So I'm going to grab my bar chart here. I'm going to hit Format Painter. And then I'm going to format paint some white space. And now we've got this thing looking a little bit more attractive. So interpreting and working with line graphs in Power BI is a little different than what you've probably seen before. So you'll notice that by default, our unit here that we're analyzing is years. So every point on the line chart right now is a year, 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. And if you click on any one of these years, they will work much like clicking on any one of the bars or pie slices from our other visualizations. It will filter all of the other visuals. The line chart itself, though, doesn't change other than it eliminates any of the values that you didn't pick. You have a couple of different options for how you can interact with line charts. You can turn on drill down mode. And you activate drill down mode by clicking on this little arrow over here in the top right corner that's pointing down. Drill down mode, when you click on that, it won't actually change anything, but when you interact with the line charts, things are going to be different. So if I were to click on 2024, you can see that the line chart changes. Well, what we've done is we've started at the highest level of this date hierarchy. We started at years. And now with drill down mode turned on, whenever I click on a year, it moves down to the next level of the hierarchy. We're now looking at quarters. Specifically, we're saying quarter 1 of 2024, quarter 2, quarter 3, and quarter 4. And if I click on one of those quarters again, now we're seeing the months, the next level, and the date hierarchy underneath the quarters. So we're seeing, I clicked on quarter 3, start seeing July, August, and September. And then if I click on any one of the months, we're now seeing the individual days. I clicked on August, so now I'm seeing all of the dates in August. At any point, if you want to go back up a level, you can click on the up arrow and you can drill up. Now, I mentioned earlier, there's not really a whole lot of people who are analyzing crime by quarter. So at any point, if you want to take quarter out of your hierarchy, you can just come over here and click on the X next to quarter. And now whenever I drill down on a year, I'm moving from the year, the highest level in the hierarchy, directly to months. And now every point on the line represents a month inside the year 2023. So that's one way. Well, that's actually two different ways that you can use line charts. A second way that you can use line charts are these double arrows, going to the next level in the hierarchy. This feature tends to be really confusing for people analyzing police data, and it isn't always super helpful. So here's what's happening. You'll notice that I'm not going to interact with the actual line here. I'm just going to click on these two double arrows. Whenever I do that, we've now moved from years to months, but we didn't filter down to a particular year. So before, you saw me click on a year, and it automatically reframed all of the data to just be looking at that 1 year, just 2023, just 2024, whatever. But whenever I click on this double arrow, it's not filtering down any particular year. So when you look and you see months here, and every point on the line is now representing a month's worth of crime, this is not any one particular September. This is every September in the data set altogether. So there have been 496 offenses in September 21, September 22, September 23, and September 24, all put together. This is useful whenever we look at like seasonal patterns and trends. So one question that often comes up is, in our jurisdiction, does crime tend to go up in the summer or down? Do we tend to see a peak during spring break? Do we tend to see a peak in theft during Christmas season? Things like that. This is useful for those sorts of things, but it's a little confusing, especially if you've got sort of non-technical end users to be looking at this, because they're going to say, what do you mean we had 476 offenses in August? That's way more than we had in August. Well, no, that's 4 Augusts all put together. And then if you go down another level, this gets even worse. So I'm going to drill down to, now we're looking at days. But again, we haven't filtered down any particular year or any particular month. We've just drilled down in the hierarchy for the entire data set. So when I look at this point, which represents the 28th, this is the 28th of every October for 3 or 4 years or whatever. It gets a little confusing. So I'm going to drill back up to my years, and we'll cover the final way that you can use line charts, and that is the little downward fork. This is actually super useful, I think. So you can expand one level down in the hierarchy here, but it doesn't combine years. So right now we're looking at a line chart that shows us January of 2021 through December of 2024, and it just aggregates points by year. But the frame is January 1 of 21 through December 20th of 24. If I hit the little downward fork, the frame of the line graph has not changed. We're still seeing January 1 of 2021 over here and December 2024 over here. But now every point on the line chart, instead of representing a year, now represents a month. And so if you hover over any one of those points, you can see this particular point represents July of 2023. As before, this would, like when we saw July, it was every July. Now all those Julys are parsed out, so you can actually see trends moving from left to right over time. But now we're seeing the entire data frame. And if I go down one more level, this is every day is now a point on the line from January 1 of 2021 through December 20th of 2024. You can also use these in tandem with each other. So say, for instance, we wanted to look just at 2024's crime. I could start at my highest level of aggregation. I could turn drill down on. I could click on 2024. Now I'm seeing January 1 of 2024 through December 20th of 2024. But I'm seeing it in months. If I want to see the individual day points, I could then hit my little downward facing pitchfork looking thing. And now we're still seeing January 1 of 2024 through December 20th of 2024. But now every point on the line is a day. And we've gone down to the lowest level of aggregation. Give you one more example of how you might be able to use this. I've got drill down turned on. Let's just say we wanted to look at November specifically of 2024. I could come all the way down here to my drill down, and now I'm looking at just November 1st of 2024 through the end of November 2024. I know that that's a lot. There's a lot going on there. So you, depending on who this dashboard is ultimately for, is really going to play a big role in whether or not you turn down drill down. Because it's really easy for end users who are not technical to just understand, okay, well, I click on this and now I'm just seeing stuff that happened in 2024. Some of the other stuff gets a little bit more drawn out. There are, for analysts though, some advanced features that are really cool. So we have not seen these yet, but if you were to click on your line chart and go back to your visualizations tab, there's actually a third section up here that is called Add Further Analyses to Your Visual. And if I click on that, it's going to give me some options to add some data science stuff you've probably seen, but there's also some wild stuff in here that is pretty cool. So the first thing you can do is turn on a trend line. And so the trend line just shows you, over this data range is crime trending up or down. And then if you drill down to a particular year, this can help you answer the question very quickly. So far this year, is crime going up or crime going down? Well, I can drill down to this year, I can add a trend line, and I can see, well, no, actually crime has been trending down all year. Versus if we look at a 4-year view, crime is actually trending up during that period. You've got a whole lot of options for visualizing this. You can change your color, transparency. You can make this solid. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Dotted. You can add a constant line if you want. You can add a minimum and a maximum. It's kind of the same way. Since we're not really doing like regression analysis or anything, I don't know if I would necessarily do that for something like this. You can add an average, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to go to my average line. To add an average line, you come here and click on Add Line. This is a little bit different than what we've seen. It's going to ask you, okay, well, what series do we want to calculate an average for? We only have one. It's just count of offense number, so that's going to select itself. And then you can come in here and you can play with the average line. So you can make it orangish if you want, fade it out, or whatever. And so what this line is representing is an average number of crimes across years. You can even turn on a data label if you want. So what this is telling me is that on average over the past 4 years, this city has 1,548 crimes occur per year. And if we drill down to months, now we can see, all right, on average, every month we have 154 offenses. And then if we drill down to days, we can see, all right, on average, we have 5.833 offenses per day in November in 2024. Pretty neat. But the really cool stuff is down here, the forecast and the anomalies. So forecasting is really cool. It is totally dynamic. It allows you to do things like project out how many crimes you think that you're going to have in a particular year. And if you hover over any point on the line, not only will it create this visual representation, but it's also going to say, all right, we believe that in January of 2025, based on prior year's data, we're going to have 126 crimes. The upper boundary of our estimate is 180. The lower boundary is 72. Meaning that there's sort of like it's constructing like an average and then confidence intervals around that. I don't know what those confidence intervals are set to, so I don't know if it's like a 95% confidence interval or whatever. And then of course these predictions are also going to persist based on the level of the data that you're looking at. So right now we're looking at years. If I drill down into the year and then the day, so I can zoom into December 20th, and it's going to look across to the 21st, and it's going to, based on all of the other data that we have, predict how many crimes that it thinks it's going to have. So we think on December 21st, which is tomorrow, there's going to be 7 crimes with an upper boundary of 13 and a lower boundary of 0. So that is pretty neat. There's also this anomaly detector, which is actually going to be turned off. I don't exactly know why that's turned off. That was a new feature, and they might have disabled it. They sometimes do that with the stuff that they kind of push out that is in beta. But we are right at our time, so maybe I'll pick up from there in our 3rd session and come back to that. No, can't exactly at the same time. Turn that off. I don't know why that is. We'll pick that up next time, though. Anomalies are, it will look at each point on the line and try to find points that the total count was outside of what it would have expected for that day. And then if it finds something like that, it tries to explain it. So if your crimes go through the roof one day, it will look at other patterns in the data and say, hey, crime was up really high this particular day. That was an anomalous day. And also, we saw an overrepresentation of crimes in Zone 3, crimes that involve motor vehicles, like whatever. It will start to kind of drill down into that pattern for you. But like I said, we'll pick that up next time we get together. Are there any questions about anything that we covered today? Was everybody able to more or less keep up? So Keith is asking, how'd you do the conditional formatting? So let me show another example there. So once you've got your matrix built, you want to go to the values section and right click on your count of offense numbers. Whenever you do that, it's going to bring up this menu, and then you can go up to conditional formatting. Now I chose to format the font color. You can also choose to format the background color, and I'll show you an example of what that looks like. So I'm going to choose a gradient, and I'm going to use add a middle color, and I'm going to tell it the lowest values I want to have a background color of green. The middle values, I'll give them sort of this warm orange, and the highest values we want to be like a really bright red. And then I'm going to click OK. Oh no. Let's just take that off. So I've now added conditional formatting to both my background and my font color, which is a horrible mistake to make because then you get this. But if I want to take any of that off, I can right click on my values. I can go up to remove conditional formatting, and I can tell it I want to remove either the background or the font color. So I'll take the font color off. And now I've got my background cells getting colored based on how high the value is. And that's actually even a little bit more readable. Does that answer the question? Amy, thank you so much. Yes. All right. So the forecasting doesn't, or the anomaly detector doesn't like other things. So if you turn off trend line, I'm going to turn off my average. There it is. All right. And anomalies turns back on if you turn off all of those other features. Amy is the student of the day. She wins. She wins the competition. Which is a sticker. But let me see if I can find an anomaly for us. So I'm actually going to take this over to its own window in focus mode. Here's what we'll do. All right, so basically what I've done is I've gone down to the lowest level in the hierarchy, and I've really got to simulate better data than this because what it's showing me is that there are some anomalies on the low end, meaning that you had a very few number of crimes that day, fewer than the system would have expected. So if you hover over any one of those gray tags, it'll show you how many there were. There was only one offense on September 3rd, 2023. How many it expected? It expected 5, and what it thought the minimum and maximum values were going to be. And then if you click on any one of those, it will bring up this explanation window. And so the explanation window on this simulated data is not particularly useful, but in production, it will look for other things like were there an unusual amount of traffic-related things that day, or were there an unusual amount of activities in certain areas geographically, things like that. And it will list those explanations out as well as measures of how impactful those patterns were. Thank you, Amy. Values to appear on the line graph, you mean the anomalies or just the data labels? So if you come back over here and drill up, get back to my report. So if you have your line graph selected, you're going to go over to format your visual. You're going to click on this bar graph with the paintbrush, and then come down here to data labels and turn that on. And whenever you do that, it should put numbers over each one of the dots. And then, of course, you can come in here and you can play with the font color and boldness and things like that. Um, Alicia, I appreciate your comments on that matrix, calling it festive. That was very kind. Yeah. All right. If there aren't any other questions, we'll call it for the day. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you in 2025. We'll pick up from where we left off. And happy holidays, happy new year to everyone. Look forward to seeing you then.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. And of course, if you guys have any questions in between now and then, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to answer anything that I can.
Sure. And for everybody attending, I will email all the registered folks and link to the recording so you can review it before the next one. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.